Hello again. Well, this time he joined me in the village of Warboys. The village lies in the Huntingdonshire district of Cambridgeshire, overlooking the Fens, and it has a history dating back from the Stone Age. However, there is a very dark history associated with this village. Back in the 16th century, it became associated with one of Britain's most infamous witch trials. The 16th century was a time of political and social change across Europe and a time of religious persecution in Britain. Henry VIII had abolished the monasteries, and in 1542 he introduced the Witchcraft Act, leading to the persecution of those suspected of practicing witchcraft, as it was now a capital offence in England. And the events that occurred in this manor house in 1589 led to the most infamous witch trial in England during the 16th century. The story concerns two families, the wealthy Throckmortons who lived here at the manor, and their not so wealthy neighbours, the Samuels, who lived in a nearby cottage. The cottage has now long gone, and a garage now stands on the site. By all accounts, the Samuels and the Throckmortons were friendly neighbours, visiting each other's homes on occasion. However, the trouble started in November 1589 when Alice Samuel had called at the manor. She was nursing 10-year-old Jane Throckmorton when the child fell into a trance. It only lasted a few moments, but on her recovery she pointed at Alice and screamed, "Take her away! She is a witch!" Mrs. Throckmorton scolded the child for her rudeness and sent her to bed. However, the fits continued until at length a doctor was called who could find no medical reason for the girl's illness. A second doctor was called, Dr. Barrow, a well-known Cambridgeshire physician. He reported that he could find no sign of disease, but he asked the parents if they had any suspicions that Jane might be the victim of sorcery or witchcraft. Soon, the other Throckmorton children were similarly affected by strange fits. Also, 12 maidservants of the household contracted the same illness, all victims, so it was claimed, of Alice Samuel's witchcraft. Despite Alice denying all accusations of witchcraft, the Throckmortons' suspicions about her grew, and in a strange twist, they forced Alice to live with them here at the manor as a servant to keep a closer eye on her. In the mid-March of 1590, events took a turn for the worst for Alice Samuel. Lady Cromwell, a friend of the family and the grandmother of Oliver Cromwell, visited the house and questioned Alice over the allegations of witchcraft. Despite her denial, Lady Cromwell decided to employ a practice believed to curtail a witch's power. She cut off a lock of Alice's hair and threw it in the fire. With that, Alice lost her temper and uttered the fatal words, "Madam, why do you use me thus? I never did you any harm, as yet." That night, Lady Cromwell was tormented by strange dreams of Alice Samuel. She later described how a cat sent by Alice had threatened to tear the skin and flesh from her body. She was so disturbed by the dream that she lay awake that night, unable to sleep out of sheer terror. Not long afterwards, Lady Cromwell fell ill with the same mysterious sickness experienced by the Throckmorton children. She never recovered, and she died just over a year after her ill-fated meeting with Alice Samuel. Following the death of Lady Cromwell, the stress got too much for Alice, and under prolonged interrogation she eventually confessed that she was indeed a witch, in league with Satan and responsible for all that had happened. Alice's husband and daughter were horrified when they heard of her confession. Fearing for her life, they begged her to recant. However, things were about to get much, much worse for the Samuel family. by now the whole village was against them, and they too were arrested, interrogated, and forced to confess. At their trial in Huntingdon, on April 4th, 1593, hundreds of people watched as each family member was forced to state, with slight variation, "As I am a witch, and did consent to the death of the Lady Cromwell, so charged the devil to suffer Miss Jane to come out of her fit." Once the family had repeated these words, Jane and the rest of the Throckmorton children recovered in full view of those in attendance at the trial. The Samuels were found guilty of bewitching the Throckmorton household and causing the death of Lady Cromwell through bewitchment. All three were publicly hanged. It is said that shortly after the hangings, Robert Throckmorton left Warboys, his wife dying shortly before their departure. What happened to the children who caused the deaths of an entire family is not known. But they were not the first children to act this way in the history of the witch trials. For example, the Pendle witch trials of 1612, and later the Salem witch trials of 1692, where the accusers were young children. Now, I've just covered the salient facts of the story in this video. If you want to know more, then there are books and more in-depth articles on the subject online. Now, if you think that this kind of Dark Age superstition is confined to the history books, then it's worth pointing out that as recently as 1990 in Manchester, England, 6 families were accused by social workers of being involved in devil worship. It really was a modern-day witch hunt in every sense of the word. Families were torn apart despite no evidence of devil worship, and the courts dismissed the charges, and later the families sued the council for compensation. So, you see, we haven't really changed much in the last 400 years. Just a few miles from Warboys is a location with a more recent history of witchcraft. The church behind me is St Andrew's Church in the village of Woodwalton, and I'm sure you'll be surprised to learn that back in 1984 it was a place of satanic worship. But fortunately, the horrors that took place in this church were supplied by the legendary Hammer Studios in an episode of their anthology TV series Hammer House of Mystery and Suspense. Now, I've always been a big fan of Hammer horror movies. I used to enjoy watching them on the TV when I was a kid, but the Hammer House of Mystery and Suspense TV series, I seem to recall, was rather hit or miss, but the episode that was filmed here was certainly the best, in my opinion. The series aired in 1984, and there were 13 episodes shot on location in England. And The Walls Came Tumbling Down was the penultimate episode in the series, written by Dennis Spooner, who incidentally was the co-creator of another of my childhood favourites, Randall and Hopkirk, deceased. Now, I'll just tell you the story in brief. The church was used in the 17th century by a satanic cult. The leader of the cult was played by the excellent Peter Wyngarde, better known for his portrayal of the flamboyant Jason King in the 1970s. Now, as you can see, St Andrew's Church is very isolated, but Hammer, with clever special effects, especially for 1984, transported it to inner city London. I'm going to have a walk around the church to see what I can recognise from the film. Starting here at the North Aisle, this was a prominent filming location. Film opens with a workman drilling through a false wall behind this door, where he uncovers a secret room containing two skeletons and ancient evil. The wooden cross above the nave is plainly visible in several scenes. The effigy of the church's patron, St. Andrew, can be seen in the niche above the door in several scenes. Today it is no longer there. I don't know why. And it's also interesting to note that two stone crosses carved into the stone on the south door are there to discourage the devil from entering the building. The Hammer House of Mystery and Suspense was the last we would hear from the Hammer Studios for many years. The series wasn't well received in the UK or in America, and I think this is down to the stories being set in the 1980s, and they were more like crime thrillers. They just didn't have the gothic horror you would expect from Hammer films. And The Walls Came Tumbling Down was the closest we got to that. So you could say the last of the traditional Hammer horrors was filmed right here. As for the church, well, St. Andrew's has been redundant since 1967, and because of its remote location, over the years it has suffered from theft, vandalism and neglect. However, since 1979, this splendid 13th century church has been under the care of the Friends of Friendless Churches. It's been lovingly restored and it's open to visitors by arrangement. Well, this is a good place to end this particular journey. If you've enjoyed it, then you might be interested to know that I'm making a video about the most infamous witch trials in England. Should be out sometime early next year. But in the meantime, if you have made it this far, then thank you very much, and please join me next time.